This is the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Pope St. John Paul II, in the first handful of talks, focuses in on those first creation accounts in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. You should read along if you can while we're walking through this. But right now we're talking about this idea of what it meant for God to create the human person alone before he created Eve. That is, what did it mean for Adam to be alone? We read in Genesis chapter 2, "It is not good that man should be alone. I want to make him a help similar to himself." Unpacking this significant element in Pope St. John Paul II's Theology of the Body, we see right here that in Adam being alone, having the opportunity to name all of the animals, having that sense of dominion, he has, in a certain respect, a search for himself. There's a test that occurs that I'll unpack in a moment. It's a defining moment where he's searching for his identity. In philosophy, from an Aristotelian perspective, this is referred to as a concept of proximate genius, this idea where there's a statement that helps to explain the very nature of a thing. In other words, the very nature of who and what we are as human beings. Now, the state of being alone, theologically referred to as original solitude, actually really helps to explain the essence of nature of who we are as human beings. It's a defining moment, as you might say. Many people say there are defining experiences and moments in their lives. This is the defining moment for us as human beings, helping us to discover and understand our humanity. As we've been walking through this creation account of the human person, it first points to the difference between us and the rest of the visible world. Specifically, I would say second, the difference between us and the rest of the living beings, plants and animals. As Adam's going about naming everything, he's realizing they're different from him. And he, at the end of the day, what we discover, Adam, representing the first human person, is more like God than anything else on earth. In fact, as we look at this understanding of being alone in the garden, there's a sense of knowledge, that is, this idea of consciousness, of self. And looking and naming all of the animals, the first person, Adam, suddenly recognizes himself as different. And with that, he also understands the significance of free will and choice. We also see that there's a greater sense of him as a human being. And I think that this is especially relevant because we talk so often about knowing and getting to know ourselves based on our experiences. But at the end of the day, the defining moment, the identity that we need to come to know is through that defining moment of our experience in relationship to God. No other defining moment should define us. In fact, Pope St. John Paul II says in the 6th of the Catechetical Talks that the human person has, quote, a unique, exclusive, and unrepeatable relationship with God. That's really important. He says unique, exclusive, and unrepeatable. That's what our relationship with God is. That is, it's unique, exclusive, and unrepeatable, as in different from the rest of all of creation, but also apply it in a subjective sense with each and every single human person. What's true of the first human being, Adam, is also true of us. This is the context and defining moment and identity that we need to come to. It's rooted in God. And I think that this is where the choice becomes so difficult for us as human beings. Even the choice that Adam himself faced with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What would he choose in that self-determination as he encountered that tree? And the one commandment at the dawn of creation that God originally gave him, to not eat from it. This is where we start to understand in this defining experience of understanding God created Adam alone in the garden, that we aren't made for this world. As Adam's naming all the animals, the body, his body, reveals that we aren't like the rest of the world. We're not like the rest of creation. Pope St. John Paul II at one point refers to the body as a body among bodies. In other words, we are more than this. Yes, we have a body, and so does the animal, but we aren't just a body among bodies. We have a transcendental dimension to us. A transcendent dimension. We're so much more than what we understand, what we appear to be. I keep thinking when I was reading that comment from Pope St. John Paul II of the book Cheap Sex by Mark Regnerus. And I remember in reading the book, it kind of pointed to this idea that we've, in this culture, become a culture of pieces of meat rubbing up against each other and interacting. You can fill in the blank. And that we're so much more than this. That as we're sharing in the created world, we have free will, we have choice. And Mark Regnerus in his book Cheap Sex points to the fact that women predominantly, historically, have always upheld the yes or no of intimacy, and that women are the gatekeepers of honoring and protecting the potency of human life and the gift of marital love. And so Adam sees himself in the garden when he's naming the animals that God presents to him as alone. Different. He has this sense of conviction that Adam didn't focus on how similar he was in that experience of naming the animals. He didn't focus on how similar he was to the animals, but instead on this idea of being alone. And this makes me even think about the idea of what does it mean to be holy? To be holy means to be set apart, to have a purpose. And so Pope St. John Paul II, in unpacking theology of the body, was prophetic in helping you and I to focus in on discovering that sense of purpose, identity, and to find that defining moment, to understand fundamentally that we're more like God than the rest of creation. And as we are in this midst of an identity crisis, an existential crisis in society where we've turned our backs on God, we've even turned our backs on our own bodies, we have to understand in that state of loneliness that we keep turning in on ourselves in, that we discover there's no other creature, animal-like level that's like me but the human person. And the human person was created by God and created like God. And that's a defining moment for us, to understand the pursuit of God in our self-identity. And this is what we'll continue to unpack in Pope St. John Paul II's Theology of the Body this week, understanding what it means for God to create us alone in the garden prior to creating that complement of male and female.